Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Allen, and I'm an interviewer for the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And the program down in Cincinnati is directed by Brian Powers, who is at the Cincinnati Hamilton County Public Library. And we have the privilege today of interviewing Mr. Kenneth Gibson, who is a Vietnam veteran, at his home at 6455 Stonehurst Drive in Huber Heights, Ohio, which is just north of the city of Dayton. Mr. Gibson, thank you for doing this interview. Do you go by Kenneth or Ken?
Either or, whatever comes out, I usually answer.
Well, we'll just use Ken today.
Okay.
All right. We're going to be talking about not only your military career, but your whole life. So let's start with where you were born and when.
I was born on what we call in West Virginia a holler called Godby Branch on March 13th, 1938, and I'm the youngest of 7 siblings.
Now, what was the name of that branch?
Godby, G-O-D-B-Y.
And what town was that near?
That's near Chapmanville, West Virginia, which is about 11 miles north of Logan.
Which is in the southern part of the state?
Correct.
Right. So were you born in a hospital or home or where?
I was born at home on a Sunday afternoon.
What was your father's name?
My father's name was Robert Larry Gibson.
And your mother?
Mother was Nellie Mae Ritter Gibson.
Her maiden name was Ritter, R-I-T-T-E-R?
Correct.
Okay. What'd your dad do?
My dad was a coal miner.
Well, that's a dangerous job. Did he have any injuries in the coal mine?
No, and he never did get diagnosed with black lung or anything.
Oh, thank goodness.
But he was a World War I veteran also.
So did he enlist, or was he drafted for World War I?
Yes, he was a cook in France during the war.
And did he survive the war without any injuries?
Yes, he did.
Well, that's good. How long was he over in Europe?
I think about 2 years.
Okay. How long was he a miner?
Most all of his life. He finally was forced to retire in the late 50s, early 60s.
Do you remember what his job, did you say he was?
Well, he did everything from loading coal in what he said was a 24-inch seam laying on his back, to drilling and shooting coal and checking for gas before the miners would go into the mines. How'd
they check for gas? They take a canary in?
I don't know, but he would had some way of checking for gas.
Okay. Well, he's with all that work, he was lucky he didn't have any injuries in the mine.
Well, back then that was about the only job available.
Did your family live was there a mining town, so to speak?
Well, they lived in several mining towns and coal camps. And I was explaining one time that a coal camp were cheaply thrown together houses that were owned by the coal company. And it was, if you lived in their house, then they collected the money that you would have paid for rent. And then they paid you in scrip. And as the only place you could spend the script was at the company store. And I mentioned Tennessee Ernie Ford in his song, St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
And that was true, right?
That was true.
Well, when you went from coal camp to coal camp, what kind of houses did you have? Were they quickly erected wooden houses?
They were cheaply thrown together wooden houses, usually a small front porch, a small back porch, and
How many rooms?
2 bedrooms and a living room and a kitchen.
And did you have electricity?
And yes, they had electricity in them.
How about running water?
Some did and some didn't.
How about your bathroom facilities? Did you have to have an outside facility?
Most of them had if you lived in the coal camp, you had an inside bathroom, and if you lived out in the out away from the mines, what we call was 4 bedrooms and a path.
So did you live in 4 bedrooms and a path occasionally?
Well, I was born in a 5-room house. We had a bathroom, but no running water.
Did you have electricity at that time?
And we had electricity at that time.
So where'd you get your water from?
My dad had a well drilled,
All right.
and we put water in the house. And the water at that part of West Virginia had a lot of iron and sulfur in it and stunk like crazy.
I've been exposed to that myself from southeastern Ohio. So you said you had a number of brothers and sisters.
Yes.
There were 7 of you?
There were 7 of us. My oldest brother was in World War II. He didn't graduate from high school because he and 4 of his friends enlisted in the Army Air Corps at age 17.
So he had to have your parents' permissions, didn't he?
And when the high school year was over, Mom and Dad went to the graduation, and they presented the parents their diploma for their sons.
So son was in the Army Air Force and not getting his certificate, but Mom and Dad got it.
Right.
Do you know why he picked the Army Air Corps?
He was wanting to be a pilot,
Okay.
but
He ended up being a tail gunner from your notes.
and he ended up, since he was so small, he ended up being a tail gunner.
What kind of a plane?
I can't remember that all, but it was.
Was he in Europe?
He was in Europe. According to what my next oldest brother told me, he flew 3 missions on D-Day
Oh.
as a tail gunner. And later on in life, I would say he suffered from what they call PTSD today, is it? And he told my mother one time his gun that he was using malfunctioned, and he raised his head up to work on his gun, and a bullet went right across where his head would have been.
Somebody upstairs was looking out for him.
Hey, amen.
Well, if he was a tail gunner over in Europe, he probably was in a B-17 or B-24.
Yeah, I think so. There's one of them in the Air Force Museum, but I can't remember which one it is.
So his name was Costello?
Costello Woodworth.
And what did he do after he got out of the military?
Well, he went into sales and then into air conditioning, And then he ended up working for an oil company in Daytona Beach, Florida.
And did he get married?
He had a wife and 5 children.
What was her name?
Her name was Margaret Gilmore.
And is Costello still living with us?
No, he passed away at age 39.
Oh, from what?
They ruled an apparent heart attack.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
He was in a restaurant buying coffee to take back to the office, and the waitress said when she turned to serve the coffee, he grabbed his throat and collapsed.
Oh boy.
And was DOA.
Oh, that's terrible. Where was he buried?
He was buried at Forest Lawn Cemetery at Peck's Mill, West Virginia, which is close to Chapmanville.
So is that where his other family members are buried?
I have my mother and dad are buried there, and I have a sister and her husband are buried there.
All right. So you also have a brother, Tom?
Thomas Richard was my next oldest brother, and
he served in the military, didn't he?
He served. He went into the military during World War II, but as soon as he finished boot camp, the war was over and they released him. And he came home and went to business school.
Where?
And became a bookkeeper for a coal company.
Where did he get his business degree?
He was just keeping the books for the store that at the company store.
Coal company?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So he did that for a while, and then...
He did that for a while, and then he was still working there. Then the Korean conflict started.
Did he volunteer, or was he drafted?
He was going to be drafted. And he told me, because one of my jobs back then was on my lunch hour to go to the post office and get the mail and bring home. And he said, if there's anything from the draft office in the post office box, leave it there. And so he was going to be drafted into the Army. And in the meantime, he went and rejoined the Navy.
All right.
And he spent probably about 10 years in the Navy. And then he got out and was in the Navy Reserves until he developed heart problems and had to be released from the service.
Well, what kind of ship was Tom on? Do you know?
Huh?
What kind of ship was Tom on?
He was on a cruiser.
Do you know if he saw any action?
No, they cruised the Mediterranean more than, and then he got assigned to a duty station in London, England.
Oh, that's nice. Was Tom married?
And there he met his first wife, and then they came to the States, and he worked for Appalachian Power Company in Huntington, West Virginia.
You remember her name?
Her name was Jean Kipp. His wife's name was Jean Kipp from London. And they had 3 children, a daughter and 2 sons that were twins. They weren't identical twins.
Okay. Is Tom still with us?
No, he had a stroke and passed away probably about 12 years ago.
And he was, what, 78 at that time?
78 at that time.
So then your next sibling was a girl?
And
Charlotte?
Charlotte, and she was graduated from high school and went into nurses training.
Where'd she go to high school?
She trained at Raleigh General Hospital in Beckley, West Virginia.
Well, that's way down at the tip of West Virginia, isn't it?
Yes. And then,
well, where did Costello? Where did you and Costello and Tom, all the kids, go to grade school?
what was it?
You and your brothers and sisters. Where all did you go to grade school, elementary school?
Well, they were down in Virginia and different parts of West Virginia when they were living in the coal camps.
Okay.
And in 1936 or 34, thereabout, my dad got a job at Winsile Coal Company at FICO, West Virginia. And there's where they settled. He was able to buy a house with a little bit of property, and after that I think they paid about $800 for a 2-bedroom house, a dining room, living room,
wow,
and a kitchen.
Wow.
And that was the house I was born in.
Well, moving from coal camp to coal camp, where would you go to school? Did the camp have a school?
Well, they went to the closest closest local school that they were transported to.
Well, about how many schools did you go to in your elementary school?
Well, I started out at Godby Branch Elementary School, and it was a 2-room school, and one room had 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, and the other room had 4th, 5th, and 6th. So the first 3 years was the room that housed them was we called that the little room, and the other one was the big room. They were the same size, but it was the older kids.
How'd you heat that little 1-room school? Coal stoves?
And then heated it with a round-bellied stove in the middle of the room, in each room.
And how about water?
And water had to go to the neighbor's house and get buckets of water and put in a cooler. And we had outdoor toilets.
It'd be a little tough in the wintertime.
Yeah. I've got a little tune that I used to. It's warm in the summer and cool in the spring, but in the winter, speed is the thing.
That's cute. So, did you pack your lunch? Did your mom pack your lunch for you?
I took a Cairo syrup bucket as my lunch bucket, and Mom would fix biscuits and peanut butter and jelly and stuff like that, and that would be our lunch.
I'm going to get it.
And I walked the first 4 or 5 years. I walked to school.
I was just going to ask you about that. How far was it?
Well, it was only about 3/4 of a mile, but I would cross the fence in our backyard and walk the cow path around the side of the mountain and across the valleys and creeks and cross the fence into the schoolyard.
A little bit shorter?
Up on the hill, up on a big point. And in the back of the point was was the Godby family cemetery. And the school was in front of that, but we weren't allowed to go up into the cemetery as kids.
Uh-huh.
And I always told the kids growing up, or after I grew up a little more, that I played pigtail on the ball team. And they wanted to know what position that was. And I said that was behind. I was the catcher behind the catcher to go run down the hill to get the ball if both of us missed it.
Oh, wow. So when was that? Was that in grade school?
That was in elementary school, and we were play tag and had recess and all that.
So you didn't have much flat area for your ball diamond, and you may have to chase the ball down the hill.
Didn't, and we were fortunate to have maybe a tennis ball to play ball with.
Oh. Well, how about other equipment? Did you have a baseball mitt or glove?
No.
Working in the coal camps, how'd your mom and dad keep you kids clothed? Did you always have shoes?
Well, we pretty much had shoes and a pair of socks that we wore all week and would wash them and dry them on Saturday night.
And how many sets of pants and shirts did you have?
Well, we were lucky if we had two.
And I suppose with as many brothers and sisters you had, there was a lot of use of hand-me-downs.
Oh, yeah. And the last one to get a bath in around number 3 wash tub.
How often did that happen?
Once a week on Saturday night.
And was the water?
I was always the last one to get a bath. I had more water in the bathtub than anybody else had.
Was it warm?
It kept
Putting in hot water.
putting in hot water to make it warm for you to take a bath.
So that was kind of good being the last, wasn't it?
Yes. This one man was talking to another that had the similar, said, how many of you took baths in the same water? And then he said, how many of you peed in the water?
Oh.
So and he said a lot of hands went up.
Uh-oh. Gee. Well, we kind of got away from talking about all your brothers and sisters. Did Charlotte get married?
She married a school teacher
What was his
by
name?
the name of Frank Toth. He was of Hungarian descent and was a teacher at the high school where I was when I started elementary school. Or not in elementary school, junior high school.
What town was that in?
It was Chapmanville Junior High School.
Okay. And Charlotte's husband was teaching there when you started?
He was teaching there when I started. Now, the Godby Branch School closed in 1947, I think it was. And I went to go to Chapmanville Elementary School, which was a bigger school. And my mother, I was promoted to the 5th grade or 6th grade when that happened. And my mother said, you're not ready for the 6th grade, you're going to take the 5th grade over again. And so I went to grade 5 and 6 at the elementary school, and then in 7th, 8th, 7 through 12, I was at Chapmanville High School. They were both, the junior high and senior high were in the same building.
Well, how about your friends about the same age? Did Did a lot of them continue on their education, or did they get into the mines, or what did they do?
Well, a lot of them, basically, if you wanted a good paying job, you had to go out of town to get it, because there weren't that many jobs available where we lived.
Okay.
And so it was that my brother Richard helped put my sister Charlotte through nurses training, and she helped put my other sister through business school. And I had another sister that went through business school and was a secretary.
All right, we'll get down through those. What did Charlotte do?
Charlotte was a nurse.
Okay, and then you have another sister, Rachel.
Rachel Augusta. She was the one. She was in business school and worked for Island Creek Coal Company store.
How long did she do that?
She did that until she got married, and then after she got married and then had her children, her first husband died of cancer when her oldest was about 18 months old.
Oh, wow.
And
what was his name?
His name was Eugene Robinson.
Did she remarry after he passed away?
No, she didn't.
She raised the kids by herself?
Yes.
And did she have to stay there in the coal mines working, or did she get a job somewhere else?
She had a job somewhere else. A lot of that was after I pretty much left home.
All right. Is Rachel still with us?
No, she passed away.
She was 80 when she passed away?
Huh?
Was she 80 when she passed away?
She was just before her 80th birthday she passed away.
And she have an ailment, or did she just...
She has a daughter and a son, another son, out of wedlock.
Oh, what caused Rachel's death? What caused Rachel's death? Did she have cancer or heart attack?
She ended up having a stroke.
Oh.
And died from that.
I didn't ask you about Charlotte. Charlotte died when she was 86, according to your note.
She was 86. Her daughter and the day I was in the hospital with a blood infection, and Faith and David and James had plans to go to Europe, and I told them not to cancel so they were in Europe, and James gets a phone call telling him that Charlotte had passed away. And her daughter and her husband was at home, and they went to breakfast. And they wanted her to go with them, but she said she'd stay at home. And when they got back, they found her dead.
Oh, shoot. She just had a heart attack, huh?
So it was a heart attack. That's what I would say.
Now, when you said
she had heart problems.
Now, you said the kids were over in Europe?
They were over in...
That was your daughter, Faith?
Faith and David.
David's her husband.
And our son, James.
Well, I forgot to announce at the start of this interview
didn't Allison go with you at that time? Yeah. And they were over there when that happened. And I've got to remember what it's going over the cuckoo's nest right now.
Well, I forgot to announce at the start of this interview that your son-in-law, David Salyer, is our cameraman today.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. And David, well, we'll get into your children in a minute. So after Rachel, you had another sister, Phyllis?
Phyllis.
And tell me about Phyllis. Was she married?
Yes, she married in the early 60s.
What was her husband's name?
Her husband was James Circle.
Circle?
Yes.
And what did Phyllis do? Was she employed outside the home?
She was a secretary for a trucking company, sales, but she was a secretary to R.F. Steiner and Company in Huntington, West Virginia. And Jim would come in and buy his trucks and stuff that he had because he was in the sausage business.
They're in Huntington?
No, a place called New Haven, West Virginia.
Where was that?
It's just north of Point Pleasant on the Ohio River.
Okay. I've been through Point Pleasant a number of times. Phyllis passed away?
No, right now she's living in assisted living in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Well, great. Do you, excuse me, do you have a chance to talk to her? Do you communicate?
Well, I call her every Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we had the same conversation each week.
That's good. I know where you're coming from. How about Jim? Is Jim still living?
No, Jim passed away. He was very successful in his sausage business, and he owned what was called the West Virginia whole hog sausage. He would take the whole hog and put it into sausage.
Wow.
And it was good sausage. And Bob Evans accused him of stealing his recipe.
But he didn't, huh?
He didn't, no.
How about Jim and Phyllis? Did they have children?
No, they didn't. Jim had an adopted son by his first wife.
Okay.
And so they...
Did that boy live with Jim and Phyllis?
Yeah. And
okay.
So Phyllis maintained a home for them until he got married. And then he had one son, and then there were some strange problems with the family after Jim died. So
that happens. Now you had a brother next in line. Was your brother Russell?
Russell. He was 18 months older than I, and he graduated from high school in 1954.
Was that from Chapmanville or somewhere else?
Same one,
okay.
Chapmanville. And he immediately enlisted in the Air Force.
And by that time, it was no longer the Army Air Force. They had a separate Air Force.
Air Force. In 1947, the Army Air Corps became the USAF.
Right. So what did he do in the Air Force?
He started out working in weather, and then he advanced into other jobs, and he was in the military for 20 years.
Did he ever fly?
Only when he had to. He didn't do any pilot training or anything.
Okay. So after he retired, what did he do?
He worked for Giant Food Corporation in Washington, D.C. area.
Did Russell get married?
He had 3 children, got married.
What was Russ's wife's name?
Her name was Shirley Johnson.
And they had how many children?
They had 3 boys.
Okay. Did Shirley work anywhere?
And she didn't work out. She didn't work outside the home.
Okay. How about Russell? Is he still with us?
No, Russell. That's questionable.
Okay. So my question is Russell still with us?
Yeah. According to his son, he told us that he died in September of 16.
Okay.
Well, I was to see him in August of 16, and he said we were taken to a room to wait for him because he was being taken care of, and then he came out and the nurse said to him, Russell, you got company. Do you know who they are? And he said, yes, that's my brother Kenneth and his wife Ruth. And we sat there and talked. He was in early dementia at that point.
Okay.
And his wife had passed away. And he said to me while we were there, Kenneth, when you see Shirley, tell her I need to talk to her. And I said, Russell, I can't see Shirley because Shirley has passed away and is no longer with us.
Yeah.
He couldn't comprehend that.
Yeah.
And then we came home. He kept looking at David's youngest child that was with us on that trip and saying, boy, she's beautiful. She's beautiful. And then finally, afterwards, we made our departure, and that was the last time I saw him. But according to them, he died in September. But the thing of it is, I had another nephew there in the D.C. area that went by and saw him in October. But according to his son, he died in September. And my daughter Grace is one that does a lot of family tree. And she went to saw where the intern, or where the
nursing
she
home.
could send if she sent $20, that they would do a research and of his Social Security and let us know one way or another. And the letter we got from Social Security was that they could not give her the information she was asking because according to their records, they had nothing to show that he was deceased.
Okay.
And the son was upset with the family, and they didn't have the best family life altogether either. So right now we don't know. As far as according to them, he's gone, but we can't find a death certificate, or we can't find a death notice or anything in the area where he was living.
So to put it in military terms, he might be missing in action, huh?
Just that's basically it.
Well, we've talked about your siblings. Let's talk some more about yourself. And when did you graduate from Chapman?
I graduated in May of 1957.
That's the same year I graduated. What'd you do after graduation?
I went to Appalachian Bible Institute over close to Beckley, West Virginia for 3 years.
Was that in Bradley?
Yes.
And Bradley, how far is Bradley from Beckley?
Oh, probably about 8 to 10 miles.
Why'd you pick Bible Institute to go to school?
Because I've known the president and founder from being a child that used to come to our church and talk about starting it. And so when I went there as a student, they had just moved from a town of Whitesville to Bradley on a dairy farm, and the students and staff and night school students totaled about 40 people.
I was going to ask you how many classmates you had. How many classmates did you have?
In my class, when I started there, I think there were 16 of us.
How many years did you go there?
I went there 3 years. I got a 3-year diploma in evangelical teacher training.
And so that was, what, about 1960?
Graduated in 1960.
So at that time you were about 23 years old?
Yeah.
And in 1960, we're not really in the Vietnam War yet, I don't think.
Okay. That during the summer months while I was there, I did internships at different locations and churches and organizations in the summer months, and then I was the last couple I had, I worked for a mission in Michigan as a camp counselor, and after we had 13 weeks of camp. It was called Christian Youth Training Camp, and that was when the Bible could be taught in the schools, and they would bring the students in, start with the youngest ones in the early summer, and work up through high school and college age. And for a week of training. And so I did that for one summer, and then that fall I worked for McDonald's in Fairfax, Virginia, when the minimum wage was $1.20 an hour, and I was making $1.25.
Well, all right.
And so after that, I applied to go back the next year, and the director of the mission wrote me a letter and said they had so many requests to do stand-up vacation Bible schools. Would I consider doing their vacation Bible schools instead of counseling at camp? And they gave me a 54-passenger school bus, and I went in a 13-week itinerary, and I would go from one church to another. I'd leave one church on Saturday and get to the next church and start setting up, and then it was called a platform type school, and I would do all the teaching and leading the singing and stuff from the platform, and then they would have the teachers with handcraft and stuff for the kids to do. And I would have to go out and pick up kids in the country and get them to the church and then take them home. And when I was doing that, I discovered that my 4D classification was no longer any good.
4D was what? Because you were in 4D was what? You were in ministry school?
4D was because I was in college and in ministry school.
Okay.
And
Well, before you get into that, who were you actually working for when you had this bus going to different churches?
that was called Rural Bible Mission in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
And how much were you getting paid by them? Were you making more than $1.25 an hour?
I don't think I was making $1.25 an hour. I got free board and room, and
Okay.
and they would give you so much, and then that was it.
All right, so you lost your 4D classification, and what did you do with that?
What's that?
You lost your 4D classification. What did you do?
Well, when I had to go check in, the draft was still in session at that time, and I had to go check in with the draft board. So I waited until I got back to West Virginia in September of 1960. And I went to the draft board, and the lady at the draft board told me, "We've already drafted everybody. We've drafted the 18, 19, 20, you're 23. You will be drafted in the next 3 weeks unless you get ordained." And I didn't want to use that as a crutch from staying out of the military. And so on the 11th of October 1960, I got my reclassification card from a 4D to a 1A. And then I got my letter to report for my physical for the draft the next day, which was the 12th of October. And the next day was Friday the 13th. My wife and I got married.
And your wife's name?
My wife's name is, she doesn't want me to give it, but I am Minetta Ruth Miller Gibson. And
She goes by Ruth?
she goes by Ruth. She doesn't like the name Minetta. And
So you got married on the 13th?
When we made out our wills, we discovered she was going by aliases.
So you got married on October the 13th in 1961.
Yes. But see, when something that I didn't bring out when we were with the company store, I was on my way from the old company store at FICO on my way home from Sunday school. And we had to either walk the road or the railroad track to get from Godby Branch to FICO. And my older brothers had already crossed the road and thought I was with my sisters, and my sisters thought I was with my brother, and I was by myself. And I can still stand here and see a red pickup truck go by, going from left to right. But I didn't look the other way, and I started across the road and got hit by a car and was drugged 40 feet.
Oh, wow.
And people always said, well, you'll never have to worry about going into the military.
Well, how old were you when you got this accident?
Because I was 5, I had both femurs broken, and that's how I got that scar right here where my chin drugged the road.
Well, how old were you?
I was 5 years old.
Oh, wow.
And what happened is that was in 1943, and what happened was my clothes caught on the grill guards of the cars at that point. They had grill guards. most of the kids that got hit with cars were thrown over the back of the car and died instantly, but my clothes caught on the grill guard, and I didn't get thrown. And I ended up waking up in the hospital with my legs stretched on my back and my legs stretched up. They were lining up the fractures in my femurs before they put me in a full body cast. And that took me that was in June, July, and August. And there was no such thing as air conditioning for homes at that time. And so I slept on a cot and with a fan on me all the time.
And with your legs all wrapped up, you had to be pretty miserable.
Yeah.
Well, after getting those legs all broken up, you still were able to be on the baseball team in school?
Well, I wasn't a sports person.
But you were a pigtail.
But I was, the coach was, one of the football coaches was was a neighbor that I grew up with, but he was older than that. And he came to my mother and asked if he could talk me into playing football. And my mother said, no, I've had him crippled up once, I don't want him crippled up again. So I never really went out for sports. I enjoyed watching basketball, but and the school where I was going was just starting a football team. So that's how I went through and at graduation. And when I graduated from high school, I was going through the ceremony, and I could see the principal and another person looking at, I felt like they were staring at me. And when I got ready to go to my graduation that night, I was in the bathroom, and I jokingly said, you might get the highest award that the school gives. And then I thought, oh, that's too true. I'm not sports minded, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. And then when they got up to present it, the other person was the president of the Kiwanis Club. And they said, would the best all-around student of Chapmanville, class of 1957, come forward and receive the Kiwanis Award? And that was the big, my sisters almost jumped off of the bleachers.
So you got the award.
I got the award.
Well, how about that? And what do you attribute your getting that award for? Were you outstanding student, and did you do a lot in school?
Well, I've always been somebody that's been wanting to help somebody, that if I could help them and do things. And I worked in the school library and this, that, and the other, and it has to do with the teachers' evaluations of you and what they thought of you, and then the Kiwanis Club would decide who would get the award.
Well, that makes me think of another question about the family. Your dad's being a coal miner, and did you and any of your brothers and sisters work during the summers to help the family get by?
In the summers when we were home, my dad, we didn't have room to have a garden in where we lived. Now, basically, where I lived in West Virginia, came down one mountain this way. There was a creek, a road, a big front yard, the house, the back door, and you started up another mountain. And so he would talk to people that owned the mountains, and he would go back on top of a mountain and what we would call clear a new ground and put in a garden. And he says, I'll give you half of what I grow if you let me do it for nothing. And that's the way we were. We would have corn and beans and stuff like that. One year, my mother canned 350 gallons of green beans.
Oh, wow.
And we always said the mountains were too high for the bugs to climb up.
Well, did you have refrigeration for those?
No.
Did you have a coal cellar?
We had a cellar, but we would can them. Mom had half-gallon jars and three-quart jars, and we would put them in a number 3 wash tub and build a fire under it and cook them for about 5 hours until the beans were all done, and then take them out. And once they got cold enough and we could move them, we put them in under the house in what we called a cellar. And there's where we stored our vegetables that we could and our canned food.
Uh-huh. So that supplement what you had to buy from the company store.
Yeah.
All right. So you go to the recruiters. You're 1A. You go to the recruiters, and what's going on?
What's that?
You're now 1A, and you go to recruiters. What's going on now? On the 13th, you get married.
On the 13th. After that, I went for my physical for the draft, and my dad had to be at the bus station in Logan for a bus load of recruits to go to Ashland, Kentucky. And I get to the bus station at about 6:30 in the morning, and in the morning get there, and I hear over the public address system, Kenneth Gibson, please report to the ticket counter. And there was the lady from the draft board handed me orders that I was in charge of the busload of recruits to see that they all got to Ashland and back. And in the meantime, I had already talked to the Air Force recruiter and had already signed up he said, do everything but tell him you're going to be joining, that you've already decided to join the Air Force. And that's what I did.
Why didn't they want you to reveal that you were already decided to join the Air Force?
Well, I would have been sent to the Army. And so everybody told me, if you want to have a family and stuff, go in the Air Force.
So you see everybody gets to Ashland, and then you see everybody gets back home, back to Logan?
Back to Logan, yes.
And then what's your next step?
The next step is I do all the paperwork, and on the 6th of November 1961, my wife was taken back to Pennsylvania, and I got on the bus and went to Ashland, Kentucky, and that evening I raised my right hand for the first time and swore allegiance to the United States, and was on my way to boot camp.
Where'd you go to boot camp?
Lackland Air Force Base in Texas.
How long was boot camp?
Well, at that time, boot camp was in 2 phases. The first phase was getting adjusted and being trained to be a military person. Then we had to go into a period called PATS, Personnel Waiting Assignment. And we couldn't do phase 2 of boot camp until we had an assignment. So I spent 6 weeks in PATS and did a lot of KP and working details.
Well, for somebody that might be looking at this interview 30 years from now, what was KP?
Kitchen police.
What did you do?
You wash dishes, you peel potatoes, you did cleaning pots and pans and all that.
That really wasn't something you signed up for, was it?
No, but that was always something that everybody had to do, a certain amount of KP.
Well, after 6 weeks of KP, what did you do?
Then I was assigned. I wanted everything. I wanted to do I wanted anything to do except the security police, the medics, or the I can't think of the other one right now. But anyway, what it usually ended up was that the security police and the medics and all became good buddies after going through training. When you get to the place, we had the theory: seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you, come around after midnight and you shall obtain. That was part of it. So we all worked together after we might have been verbal enemies going through boot camp.
So you got to the second stage.
I got to the second stage.
How long were you in there?
That was 5 weeks.
And then what was your assignment?
And then I was shipped to Gunter Air Force Base in Alabama.
Is that up near Montgomery?
In Montgomery, to go through tech school to become a medic.
But you didn't want to be a medic, did you?
I didn't want to be a medic, but that's what they always preached. This is the jobs we need now. You may not want it, but this is what you got.
All right.
And so that was in got there in late January and left there in August of that summer.
That's 1962?
1962.
So what kind of training did you have there at Gunter to be a medic?
I was being trained for nursing technician, to work as a nurse's aide or a corpsman, as they put it at that time.
Okay. So after you finished your training at Gunter...
Finished, I had a car that was in storage that was registered that I bought in Michigan. And I had 4 days to get from Montgomery, Alabama to Logan, West Virginia, get my car out of storage and drive to Lubbock, Texas.
What kind of car was that?
It was a 1957 Plymouth station wagon.
Was that your first car?
That was the first car I owned.
What was the first car your dad ever owned?
T-model Ford, I think. Because he
So how'd you get from Montgomery to Logan?
Well, I had to register my car, so I had my paperwork and I went into Montgomery and registered my car in Alabama and got a license plate, and I put it in my suitcase and I flew to Huntington, West Virginia.
Where'd you fly in?
Was
it commercial or military?
It was commercial airline. And then I put the license plate on took the Michigan plate off and put the Alabama plate on and drove it to
Lubbock?
Lubbock. And I left that on until they told me I had to get Texas plates on my car.
What base were you at in Lubbock?
Reese Air Force Base.
Reese?
R-E-E-S-E.
Okay. And what did you do at Reese?
I started out working in nursing as a male technician, working on a male medical surgical ward, taking care of patients. And I worked at that. The chaplain had talked to the nurses to get me, because he wanted us to work in the chapel program. And they set me up a schedule where I would work 10 nights on and have 5 nights off. And that way I would be off every Sunday, so I could do the chapel program.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on until I got an assignment to go to, but while I was there, I went from working night shift, and then the supervisor of nursing service came to me one day and said, "We need you to work over on the maternity floor." And I went over there and I relieved a person that was outranked me, and took over supervising the technicians and nurses' aides on the maternity floor, and did that until I went to Vietnam.
What was your rank there when you were on the maternity floor?
I was a 3-striper. I was, at that point, it was Airman First Class, which is now the sergeant. The first sergeant in the Air Force is a sergeant.
When did they give you that designation as Airman First Class? There in Lubbock or earlier?
There in Lubbock.
Okay.
And at that point, promotions were frozen. If they didn't need you, they didn't consider you for promotion. You had to not only just, it was for everybody. They just had that many people in the military.
What did they promote you because you were going to be going to Vietnam, or what?
Well, I think a lot of it was because they saw the type work I did and the relationship that I have with the patients.
Mm-hmm.
And one time, this patient said to me, I don't agree with the doctor's diagnosis. And he said, I want to walk 5 feet to the bathroom. And I looked at him and I said, I can't let you go to the bathroom because the doctor has ordered strict bed rest. And then he said, well, I don't agree with the doctor. And the doctor said to him, that sort of hit me wrong way in the middle of the night. And I said, well, do you remember Sergeant so-and-so? Yeah. Because he was I said, he didn't agree with the doctor and he died last week. So you're staying in the bed. And he never gave me any problem after that.
So, your training at the Bible Institute helped you out, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, before you went to Vietnam, did you have a chance to go up to Pennsylvania and see your wife?
Well, when I got my orders for Vietnam, it was on the President's Day when I was first notified, and we were before this happened. Ruth and I had a disagreement, and she said, well, one of these days they're going to ship you to where I can't go. And I thought, so after it was coming up on Friday before the President's Day weekend, the first shirt came in with the nursing supervisor, and he was red in the face and this, that, and the other, and the West Texas winds would blow tumbleweeds and stuff, and we had a cantonment type hospital, and we were supposed to get out and police up the area around our section, and I thought he was going to chew me out because I hadn't done it. And he said, Airman Gibson, we just got notified that you're going to be going to the 6252 TAC Fighter Wing, Da Nang, Vietnam. That was on Friday. My heart sank and I fell. Now I got to go home and tell my wife. And how am I going to tell my wife after what she had said? And I got home, and because I wasn't fit to work the next day, the rest of the day, and went home, and she wouldn't believe me.
Well,
she thought I was trying to get revenge on her.
Well, was Ruth living with you down there at the base of Lubbock?
Yes.
Okay, so how long had she been with you on the base? I thought she was still up in Pennsylvania.
No, she was when I finished tech school and we drove to Michigan. When I finished tech school in Alabama, we got together and drove to Michigan. Drove from Chapmanville to Lubbock.
Okay, so she's with you.
Yeah, she was with.
Well, where did you live? Did you live on base or in town, or?
We lived into a converted 2-car garage, which was not a, it was about half the size of this room, and it had a small living room, a small kitchen, a bedroom, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom.
So things were tight, to say the least.
Well, when I went into the military, my base pay was $87.50 a month. And we paid $60 rent.
Oh, gee.
And rent included everything but a telephone.
Everything but a what?
It included the water, electric, and everything but a telephone.
Okay.
And
well, did Ruth work to help get through things?
She went down afterwards, went to, in the meantime, out of that $87.50, they would take $40 of that and add $50 to it and send her a check for $90, which was called a Class Q allotment. And then she went down to we got to Lubbock, and we went down into the city of Lubbock to drive around and see where things were. And she saw a store that says G.C. Murphy on it. And
that was a 5 and dime, wasn't it?
yes. And so she said, when she was in Bible college with me, she worked as a sales clerk for G.C. Murphy in Beckley. And so she went in and made an application. And she put down on her application that she had G.C. Murphy experience. And that store had just opened.
Mm.
And the manager called her and says, how do you have G.C. Murphy experience and you're living here in Texas? And she told him. He hired her on the spot.
Good.
And she was getting paid $25 a week for a 40-hour week. And she had to pay $5 for somebody to pick her up and drive with her. So she made about $10 a week.
Oh.
To add to our Class Q allotment, and then I got down where I was getting $13 every 2 weeks from the Air Force after taxes and Social Security.
I guess things were tight, to say the least, weren't they?
Yes. But
so
Campbell's soup, tomato soup, was 10 cents a can at that time, and now it's $1.30 a can.
how much was gasoline back in those days?
Back in those days, you could fill your tank for $2.
So you have to tell her you're going to Vietnam, and you didn't go back that day. When did they finally send you to Vietnam?
I went to after that. I went back to work after the presidential holiday. I went back to work, and my boss came on the floor to talk to me, and I said, have you heard anything more about my assignment to Vietnam? And he picks up the phone and he calls assignments, and he said, how much leave do you want? I said, I'd like 30 days leave if I could get. He said, you can't have it. I said, well, at least 2 weeks. So they gave me 2 weeks of leave, and I started out processing that day, started getting my shots and everything that I needed to do to go to Vietnam. And we went to Vietnam.
Well, did you come back to West Virginia?
Yeah,
during that 2 weeks?
We came back to West Virginia, and my brother took me up to Ruth's home in Pennsylvania, and then we came back and flew back to Texas from Huntington, West Virginia. And then wasn't long after that, I out-processed. I had to have a port call number before I could finally out-process, and they gave me a port call number. And after that, I got my things ready and left for Vietnam on about the 6th of March. And after that,
6th of March of
61,
62. Now, where did you fly? You flew from the States.
I flew from, well, see, with the port call, and I got out of the States without going through M16 training, without doing something else. And this is how fast they sent me through. And I got to Vietnam, and I'd never fired an M16 before.
Where did you fly from?
I flew from Lubbock, Texas to San Francisco, and then flew out of, on Flying Tiger, flew out of San Francisco to Seattle, and they told us to get off of the plane in Seattle and stretch our legs, because they may not let us off the plane when our next stop is going to be Japan. And I flew out of Seattle, and when I landed in Japan on Saturday morning, I'd lost a day, had lost a day. I was already a day ahead. And then they wouldn't let us off the plane in Tokyo, because they felt that Charlie would be referring to the North Vietnamese, would be counting military people. And we were there 3 hours getting prepped for another 6-hour flight to Saigon. And I got to Saigon, and then next thing I knew, I was on a C-130 flying up to Da Nang.
Well, from Japan to Saigon, was that a commercial plane or was that a military?
It was a commercial plane.
Other military on that plane with you?
There was a plane full of military.
So you land in Saigon. How long are you in Saigon before you go to Da Nang?
That night.
Did you get off the plane in Saigon?
I got off the plane in Saigon, and then we had to get they had a plane there that was going to Da Nang, and they put me on it.
And was that a military plane?
Yeah, it was a military plane.
Well, I've asked this of other veterans. What struck you when you got off the plane there in Saigon? Anything about the weather or the atmosphere?
Well, the weather, it was hot and humidity, and couldn't get anything cold to drink.
Was there anything about the odor there at where you landed?
Not really.
Okay. How about when you went to Da Nang?
Well, I got to Da Nang. They met me at Da Nang and took me and put me in a tent. And then the next day I got processed.
So, did you stay in Da Nang then after you were processed?
Yes.
What were your accommodations there? Where'd you stay, sleep?
Well, the first accommodations was a tent, and I was just getting settled into that, and they were building the first barracks that they took us down and put us on. That was being built by the flight line. Sometimes the planes landing and taking off felt like they were going to come through the barracks.
Mm-hmm.
And I could stand out and watch them land and take off, and that's how close we were to the flight line. And then after that, we were in the medics got the second barracks that was being built down in that area. And at that point, I got there to Da Nang, but my whole baggage, my uniforms and everything, didn't arrive for another 6 weeks.
Gee, that's worse than the commercial nowadays.
And so when I got from Da Nang, got down there, one of my first details, I was told that the 200-bed casualty staging unit had not arrived yet in Vietnam. And I was there to help staff the 250-bed hospital. And so I volunteered to do detail work, to have something to do. But one of my first details from the medical department was to drive the cracker box between the dispensary and the barracks, which was about 4 miles, to transport hospital people and dispensary people back and forth.
Oh, you called it a cracker box. What was that, the ambulance?
Cracker box was an ambulance that we transported people in rather than patients.
Oh, okay.
And then I would have, and part of my deal that first time, that first assignment, we had to burn honeydew pots. And honeydew pots was the bathroom that we would have to put fuel oil in and burn it and stir it until it was cooked and into ashes. And I got back up to the dispensary, and I had on, at that point, what they call 1505 uniform, and it was soaking wet with sweat. And they grabbed me and gave me salt tablets and everything, started hydrating me. And and then from there on, we went out and I worked on buildings like that, and then for, I would say, 6 months, I worked in outpatient records.
Okay.
Outpatient records and doing people when they And that's where I was working when the chaplain came and told me that I was the father of a baby girl in August, and I'd been there since March. And that night they arranged for me to call her,
Call Ruth?
which was shortwave radio. And it was, "Hello, I love you, over."
And that first child was Faith, right?
And she would have to say a couple of 3 words to me and say, "I love you, over." And everybody on the short waves would flip it, and that was the communications that we had at that time.
Well, that first child was Faith?
First child was Faith.
Okay. Now,
And
I'm going to show some pictures. Who's that?
that's me.
All right. Where are you?
I'm outside. About right in here was my barracks.
Okay, let's give Dave time to. We're back on, and Dave is focusing on this photo, and this is you at Da Nang,
Yes.
and your barracks was over to the extreme right of that photo.
Yes.
All right.
That was some storage lockers that we were putting a roof over to keep supplies, medical supplies stored in.
Did you have to do any work on that roof?
Yeah, I did some work on that.
So besides being a medic, you're a carpenter?
Well, it was something to do, either that or fill sandbags, and so I worked on that. And this is one of my buddies that lived across on the opposite side of the foot of my bed. We became pretty good friends.
His name was Hendricks?
Hendricks, yes.
And this is in May of 60 what?
Huh?
This was in May of what, 60?
May is probably 62.
Okay.
Which picture's that?
You got it?
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you referred to as a Cracker Barrel?
Yes. Now when I had that detail, we would drive it all day, and I would during the day I would have to drive for those that wanted to go to China Beach to go swimming and spend the day. That they would. I would take a load over and in the morning and go back again at about midday, and then come back and then go back at around 4 o'clock and pick up the last load and come back. And that's just a casual picture standing outside the barracks. There were no windows in that. That was just screen and 2 inches of Filipino mahogany is the sides of the building.
Got that? Da Nang was a pretty big base, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
Did you have any mortar or artillery attacks while you were there from the enemy?
Well, the closest I was into an attack was about 3 weeks before I came home.
Okay, we'll get into that in a little bit then.
I guess this is 3 of my buddies.
We'll give Dave time to focus in.
And we were leaving to go on an in-country R&R, and which was at Von Ta, I think, Vietnam, which was south of Saigon, Tan Son Nhut. We were down there for 4 or 5 days, just being able to relax and eat and treat ourselves.
So one of the fellows is Glenn Payne, P-A-Y-N-E.
Glenn Payne.
And the other one is Richard?
Richard Laser, I think, and myself.
All right.
Okay, that's when we arrived in Saigon on that R&R, and I was I had problems on an old AC-47 from Da Nang to Saigon, and I got airsick, and I was about to barf my toes up when we landed.
All right, now you've been in Saigon, you were in Da Nang, you talked about Tan Son Nhut. I'm going to let you show us on this map. I'm going to be behind the map, and you point out as soon as Dave focuses in on it and show us where you were. You landed in Saigon.
I landed in Saigon here, and
you then came up to Tan Son Nhut.
We landed at Tan Son Nhut, and then I flew a C-130 from Tan Son Nhut up to Da Nang, which is right here on the coast, and not far from the DMZ. And I was there working as a nursing technician, and then after the casualty staging unit was a 200-bed hospital built out of house trailers. And then we would have 8 to 10 patients in each section, and we would receive patients from the field hospitals. Sometimes we'd go out to the field hospitals and pick up the patients, and others they were flying them in from all parts of Vietnam, and we would process 90 to 100 patients a day.
I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Show us on the map where you went for R&R.
R&R was down here, and it was in this part of Vietnam. It was in the safer part of Vietnam, and it was just an area that they had it set up with a hotel, and you could get all your amenities and take care of yourself. And it was, we couldn't afford, we were married, and we couldn't afford to fly our wives to the Hawaii or the Philippines or someplace like that to visit and spend time with family.
So you didn't see Ruth all the time you were over there in Vietnam, did you?
I didn't see her from the time I left until the time I got back.
Well, I want to ask you some more about your being a medic and up there in Tan Son Nhut. I interviewed a combat nurse, and it was very interesting. So I would like for you to give the folks that might be listening to this and watching it, what you did on the average day up there at the 200.
Well,
patient.
on the average day, it was like being in a hospital.
What time did your day start?
Our day started at 7 o'clock in the morning until about 4 in the afternoon. And then we would have to get the patients cleaned up, and they would be classified as to whether they were going to stay in country, go out of country, go to the Japan, or go to the Philippines, or go back to end up on the way back to the United States. And that would keep us. And I had one patient that the doctor had written orders on to deep breathe and cough and deep breathe every 4 hours, because he was more of pneumonia than anything else. And he would say, I can't. And I said, yes, you can. And then I'd put a pillow across his stomach and make him hold it, and then make him cough and deep breathe. And it was probably about a month or 2 months later, I would go down on the flight on the bus to pick up a load of patients that were flying in. And he was on the bus. He came off the plane. And he said to the man next door that was sitting next to him, that was a friend of his, he says, if you get him, don't tell him you can't do something. He says he'll see that you do. And it was good to see him come back and be able to finish his tour.
Right.
But
now, they're at the hospital. You said they were like what? They were metal buildings, like a bus.
yeah, we had a travel bus, an Air Force bus that would have seats on it, or you could put 2 layers of people on litters, one on each side, and then and you could put about 8 to 9 litter patients on a. And one day the nurse said to me, Sergeant Gibson, you bivalve this man's cast. And I said, bivalve. I called him by name and I said, after working the last 3 or 4 years in labor and delivery, I don't know what bivalve is. And it was where when people that were in body cast or anything like that, we had to take the saw and cut down the sides of the cast, but not take them off, but then wrap them in ace bandages, because if they were up in the air flying on a long flight, they could, if they started swelling, they could release the pressure in that way. But then they had to be recasted when they got to their destination.
Well, would you see any of the fellows coming in directly from the field without having had any wounds treated?
No, we would go to the MASH units and pick them up after they had been taken in and treated. We wouldn't get the patient until they had been treated in the field hospital.
All right.
We weren't an emergency hospital. We were a staging unit to get them out of country or where they're going.
So when you went up to the MASH unit, what was your job? Were you driving or what were you doing?
No, I was there to help carry the patient out of the MASH unit and put them in the cracker box and take them back to the dispensary or where we were.
Okay.
Or we would go down to the plane that flew in and take them off the plane and put them on the bus and take them up to the staging unit.
Did you have wounded fellows coming to your place on helicopters?
Not us.
Okay.
We weren't that type of unit. We didn't get them until after they had been treated.
Well, when you were up at the MASH units, did you see guys being delivered to the MASH unit on helicopters?
I never did see the helicopters.
Okay.
But I did write to Ruth and tell her at one time, I said, if I'm sending, if I get in the shape of some of these that we're sending home, I said, they'll do you a favor and me a favor if they let me die. Because I didn't want to come home like with the problems that some of the casualties that I was taking care of.
Some real bad conditions, right?
Yeah.
So when these patients came to your unit, did you have to classify them as, we can help these guys or we can't help these guys?
Well, that was the doctors that were there would classify them according to the type of injury they had that we received them in. We were mainly to clean them up, give them a bath, and put clean clothes on them, and give them a bed to sleep in while they were there, and get them ready to move out the next day.
So you treat up to 100 a day?
We would ship out up to about 100 a day and could receive about 100 a day.
Well, after you got off duty, how'd you spend your evenings?
Well, if I was a drinking person, I could go to the NCO club and get drunk.
Were you?
And I'm not a drinking person.
Okay, so what did you do?
I more or less spent time with the friends of ours, playing canasta or something like that, because we weren't allowed off the base.
Sure.
And
how was the food while you were there at Tonsanute?
well, after they got the thing set up, the thing I missed most was not having ice in my iced tea. But after they got to where they could supply ice to us, that made the food taste a lot better.
Were you a smoker over there?
No.
Did you drink beer at all?
No. The only one time I had a glass of champagne.
What was the occasion?
And the occasion was the All-Star game. We had a, what do you call it, where you put your name out and decide
Oh, you had a pool?
a pool, yeah. And so the three that I buddied around with, Glenn and Richard, we decided that we would put all three names on three different, rather than just one name. That way you had three chances of splitting $100 three ways. And so they came in, and I was back in the X-ray department talking to somebody, and they came in and handed me $33. and brought a bottle of champagne, and I said, "What's the celebration?" And they said, "You mean to tell me you weren't listening to the ball game?" I'd forgotten about it. But we had won the pool.
Do you remember who won the game?
And so the three of us shared with others a bottle of champagne, and that was our celebration. And that's what I used to buy my wife a set of china and have it sent from Tokyo to Lubbock.
Well, do you remember who won the All-Star game?
I don't remember, but it was a long game because I think it was tied it went about 10 or 12 innings.
Well, what were you doing with your money? How much were you making when you were over there in Vietnam? How much were you paid a month?
Well, I got combat pay, but right off I don't recall how much I was getting.
Were you sending money home to Ruth?
Everything went to her because I had it set up to where it would go to our bank account.
Did you get paid any kind of U.S. money, or did you have some kind of chits that you were paid in?
If we were off base, we used Vietnamese money, and you couldn't use any dimes or nickel or pennies over there. Everything was rounded up because it would throw the coin counters off. And so most of the stuff that I bought would be through the base exchange of ordering stuff.
Okay.
And I could go in there and buy snacks and stuff. And
well, we talked about you talked about liking tea when you could get ice for it. How was did you go to the mess hall to eat, or did you eat in your barracks, or where did you eat?
You had to, if you ate a cooked meal, you had to go to the mess hall.
How was the food there?
Yeah, it was good. And some of the older NCOs that would work at the NCO club and the officers club, and somehow or another we would end up with having grilled steaks.
Pretty nice.
So they would grill them, and you could have a steak rather than. That's how I learned to eat steak. That was anywhere from medium. I usually lay mine medium to medium well, but sometimes I eat some a little rarer too.
When you were there at Tan Son Nhut or out at a MASH unit, were you ever subjected to enemy attack?
Well, the only enemy attack that I was in was not long before I left to come home.
Where were you?
At 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Charlie dumped 33 rockets in on us, and the first one landed about 30 yards from the barracks that I was in. And one man had just got there. He was head of the flight surgeon's office, and some of the shrapnel went through 2 inches of Filipino mahogany and the way it went in, and hit him in the rear end, and he they saved his life, but he was almost gone. But he was returned to the States.
And that was the first day he had been there?
And he hadn't been there but a week or so.
Oh.
And when I got out of bed, when the attack happened, you get out and get as low as possible, and I was on the second floor, but I was on the opposite side of the barracks where the shrapnel came from. And I skin up this knee.
Your left knee?
But I started going down to the dispensary and the casualty staging unit to do any help that I could do. And after it was all over, Glenn Payne, my bunk partner, he was on duty that night, and when he saw that I'd injured my knee, he said, "You get in there and get that on your record." And he then they said, "Do you want us to send your wife a telegram?" I said, "Don't you dare send her a telegram that I've been injured." And so at that point, we didn't have to pay postage on our letters. We just write free up where the stamp was. And I grabbed a piece of paper and said, "I'm fine. In case you hear everything, I'm fine." And I sealed it and dropped it in the mail.
So did you write to her very often?
Well, I tried to write to her in faith. I'd write to Ruth, and she'd have to have problems deciphering my handwriting. And then I'd write faith notes. And
well, when you say they had trouble deciphering, did you have a handwriting like a doctor, or where you can't read what they have to say, or did you try to write so that somebody could read it?
Well, my hand and my mind would be a lot faster than my hand. And so I would start something, and then I didn't. And after she figured out what I was writing about, then she could answer me. But I got a letter from her almost every day.
Well, that was good. Good for your morale.
Yeah.
While you were over there in Vietnam, other than the night that you had the rocket attack, are there any other instances, day or night, that stand out in your memory?
I said some of the incidents that I would have, there were men that were afraid to go to sleep at night. And they would walk the floor all night. And that was the main thing that I could see with them. But I could go turn my light out over my bunk and conk out.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be a card game at the foot of my bed on the other side of the barracks.
And you'd be sound asleep.
Now, I'd go sound asleep.
Did you have to work in the unit on the weekends, or did you have weekends off, or what?
Just a rotating shift, and if mine came up, I would have to be on the shift. Okay, get that picture there.
Listen.
Yeah. That's a picture of me.
Let's give him time to focus in on it.
Okay. That's me being sworn in for my last 5 years in the Air Force.
You see that?
I re-enlisted for 5 years at that point, because that would put me over 26 years in the Air Force, and that was the highest number of that I could get my retired pay based on. Which one?
That's your retirement, December 1?
That was when I was being retired from the Air Force.
December 1 of 87.
Yeah. And that's me and the hospital commander giving Ruth her and honoring her for her 26 years as a wife, military wife.
So you're in the middle, Ruth is on the right, and
Yes.
the commander's on the left.
Yes.
Where'd that take place?
That was at Wright Pat Air Force Base
In Dayton, Ohio?
in the hospital.
Dayton, Ohio? Dayton, Ohio?
Yeah. Yes. That's what I looked like when I went in the Air Force. And we had pictures, we would have to have pictures of us when we were, people would come into the section, they'd have to see who the NCO was as the floor.
So this says you were a 6 striper. What's that mean? What is
Well, I was a master sergeant.
Okay, and that's when you left Vietnam. What was your rank?
I was a staff sergeant.
So where did you fly back to the States from Vietnam? Where did you leave? Saigon?
I had to fly down from Da Nang to Saigon, and I got up on, put it this way, I got up on Thursday morning, spent the day, and was at Saigon on Thursday evening waiting for my plane to come in, and it was a TWA flight, and I had to be in full dress uniform, and we saw the plane come in, and the people deplaned, and they serviced the plane, and we loaded, and 5:30 Thursday evening, the wheels left the ground in Saigon.
Yeah.
And I flew back into Thursday morning. And we were in Kadena in Okinawa. And then from there we went from Okinawa to Honolulu. And I got off the plane in Honolulu to say at least I was in Hawaii in my dress uniform. And then I had another 4 or 5 hour flight from Hawaii to San Francisco. And I was flying military standby. And I got on the plane in San Francisco to fly to Dallas, Texas. And they came on, and they had to take bump 2, and I was one of the 2 that got bumped. The next day, I spent the next day going from place to place trying to get a ticket to I was going to pay for my own flight rather than go standby And finally, the lady at the ticket counter, I forget which plane it was, she said, if you fly from here to Los Angeles and change planes, then we can get you on a flight to Dallas, Texas. And then from Dallas, Texas, she says, I've got you on a flight for Dallas, Texas to Lubbock. But when you get to the Dallas, don't go to the ticket counter. She said, you go like you know you've got reservations to the ticket office, to the gate where you're going to be boarding. And she said, they got to get you on that flight. But you don't have reservations. And that's how I got into San Francisco on like Friday evening, and I didn't get into Lubbock, Texas until Saturday evening.
Oh, wow.
Because it was Easter weekend. And that's when Ruth and Faith and Grace were at the airport in Lubbock to meet me.
Well, how long had they been waiting for you to get there?
Well, they had been waiting. I was hoping to be there the day before.
Right.
But I think I ended up finally calling her and telling her where the
next day?
What the plan was, and that I should be there. And there was a lady sitting by her wanting to know why she was there, and she says, my husband's coming home from Vietnam. And that's when the war wasn't popular, and
right.
She got up and moved.
She got up and moved, I'll be darned.
She didn't want to sit with my wife.
Now, when you got to Lubbock, did you still have your uniform on?
Yes.
What time of day was it? Daytime?
I think it was in the evening.
Did you have any problem with any of the people in the airport with your uniform on?
No.
So, Faith was born in August of '63, and you're coming home to Lubbock in what, 63?
I went over in '66 and came back in '67, because Grace was born in '66, I think.
Grace was born in '66.
Yeah. Because Faith was
born in '63.
She was born in August of '63, and Grace was born in August of '66.
But when Faith is born, you're over in Vietnam.
Yeah, no, when Grace was born, I was in Vietnam.
Where were you when Faith was born?
I was at Lubbock, Texas.
Yeah, I forgot that.
She's the one I helped deliver.
Well, tell us about that. You told me before we got on the camera, but tell us about giving birth to Faith.
I was working labor and delivery. I had just been assigned. I hadn't been working that much, but I was supervising the what they call corpsmen or nurses' aides. And she came in for an appointment, and the doctor wouldn't let her go home because her water had broken and she wasn't in labor. And they admitted her to the hospital. And the next day, I had about 6 patients that were delivered and were discharged. And Ruth got up and come back and helped me clean the units and make the beds and get everything ready for when other patients were coming in. She hadn't been diagnosed with a fever or anything at that point. And so after Faith was born, the doctor put her over in what was called a bassinet, and that's where I would clean the babies up, give them a bath, treat their eyes with silver nitrate, and give them a shot of vitamin K and footprint them and things of that sort, and get them dressed and show them to the mother. And when Faith was born, I would lay her on her back and I'd pull her feet down like this and they'd fly back up. And I'd push them down again to get her to lay flat and they'd fly back up. And then I started thinking, this baby's deformed. But then it dawned on me that was the fetal position that she was in when she was born, because she presented instead of head first, butt first. And at that point, Ruth, the doctor told me later, he said he thought he was going to see her go home in a box rather than take a baby home.
Because meaning that Ruth was going to die in the delivery?
He was afraid she was going to die on him. And so he said, you go home, and she told Ruth to go home and do nothing, and that I could do it. He sent me to working there in the hospital and knew what I could do.
Well, what did you do about Faith's legs? How did you get those?
Well, Mother Nature went to work and she straightened out. It was just that she was in that position. Her legs were up like this.
Yeah. Okay, so you're back in this. You're back in the States. You're back with the family.
Yeah.
Then, how soon was it that you re-upped for the Air Force?
Well,
right away, or did you work a while?
Well, I had just somebody, when I got orders to go to Vietnam, somebody said, "Did you volunteer to go to Vietnam?" I said, "Well, I just re-enlisted." And I said that I raised my right hand and said I swore to support and defend the United States. So I guess you can say I volunteered.
Well, when you were over in Vietnam, did they offer you anything special if you signed on for more months over there?
Well, when things like that happened, I came up a day late and $1 short. Because they had just started it, hadn't started it yet, or they had started and I didn't qualify for it.
All right. Well, let me talk about some of your decorations and medals. You got an Air Force Commendation Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. What did you do to earn 2 oak leaf clusters?
Doing my job. That's.
You had Air Force Outstanding Unit Award with 1 oak leaf cluster. Same response?
Same response. I got when I was in London, stationed in England for 5 years.
You got an Air Force Good Conduct Medal with 1 silver and 2 bronze oak leaf clusters?
Yeah.
Now, what were those for?
Those are, I guess, the easiest thing, keeping my nose clean.
You got a National Defense Service Medal.
Yeah.
You got a Vietnam Service Medal.
Yes.
You got an Air Force Overseas Short Tour Ribbon.
Yeah, because I was over there a year.
And then you got an Air Force Overseas Long Tour Ribbon. Was that because of England?
Yes.
An Air Force Longevity Service Award. Is that because you were in there for 20-some years?
I think so.
All right. Well, you spent some time after Lubbock and Vietnam. You spent some time in Enid, Oklahoma.
Advanced Air Force Base, Oklahoma. I was NCOIC of the clinic, Air Force clinic.
How long?
I got there in about 3 years, and when I was at the clinic, or when I came back, I was at Amarillo, and I worked labor and delivery there, and then they closed Amarillo, and then I was transferred. I was going to go to Shepherd Air Force Base, but they diverted me up to Vance Air Force Base, which was a training wing, and
Outside of Enid?
And that's at Enid.
Uh-huh.
And I got there, and we had there was an IG inspection, and we had a bird colonel chief nurse of the ATC that was bucking for general. And give you a reason of type of mind she has, the nurse introduced me as the new NCOIC of the clinic.
Now, what does that mean, NCOIC?
Non-commissioned officer in charge.
Okay.
And she looked at me and she said, I've inspected you at Reese Air Force Base, and I've inspected you at Amarillo Air Force Base. And she was the type that would get you cornered and you couldn't get out. And she caught me in the supply room one day, and she leaned up on one side of the door and the other and said, she started questioning me. And then she said, well, let's go across the hall, and she sat down on the end of an exam table, and she drilled me for another 20, 30 minutes.
About what?
My job. Things that she wanted to know what I was capable of doing or not.
All right.
And so that afternoon, the IG team left. After they left,
Now, IG means what? In grade?
in Inspector General's office.
Okay.
And I was up in the hospital commander's office talking to his secretary, and he came in from escorting the team to the flight line. And he went in his office and he yelled, and come in here. He said, I've been yelled at all day, now it's my turn to start yelling. And I thought, oh God. And he just said, I just want to thank you for the job you've done. Said, in fact, you were the only one that the Colonel Gershoma had anything decent to say about. But she never did, as far as I know, make BG, Brigadier General.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But she was bucking for it.
Well, how did you get from Reed over to England? What was the reason you went there?
Well, at that point, the Air Force was moving people just to move them. They didn't want you to stay there and become a permanent party. And I get a notice and get a call that I have orders to go to England.
So you were there 5 years?
I was there for a little over 5 years. And
Was
then
Ruth with you?
Huh?
Was Ruth with you?
Well, they were supposed to go with me, but my request for concurrent travel, which meant that the family traveled with you, was denied by the wrong base. And so I had to go to England in September, and they didn't join me until December.
Okay. Well, my cameraman is running short a little bit on time. He has another appointment, and but I want to cover you've got Faith and you've got Grace, and you had a son, Jim.
James.
James.
Oh, he doesn't like to be called anything but James,
All
even
right.
when he was a kid.
He was born in '69.
Yes.
And when you got back here at the States, did Ruth work outside the home?
No, she's always worked inside the home.
Okay.
I can't say she didn't work.
Well, taking care of 3 kids is work. Now I know Faith. Faith is in the eye business.
Yes.
What does she do?
Faith or Grace?
Both of them?
Oh, Faith is an optometrist.
Okay.
And Grace works as an assistant librarian in Pearl River, Louisiana.
And Faith lives in the area. And how about James? Where does James live?
Well, James is in the process. We just became empty nesters, and he just got married, and he's moving to Kentucky.
Whereabouts in Kentucky is he?
Alexandria. It's just
Okay.
south of Cincinnati.
Okay. And Faith is married to David Salyer,
That's right.
and David is an attorney.
Yes.
And Faith and David have several children.
3. And a grandchild and one on the way.
Oh wow! How about Grace? Does she have children?
She has 3 or 4 children. One is a nurse practitioner in Little Rock, Arkansas, and the other one lives in Amsterdam, and he's been working for Cargill Industries in Amsterdam, and Maddie is working for the United States Department of Agriculture in West Virginia as a soil scientist, and William, he's in school at Mississippi State working on his master's degree in agronomy, and so he's hoping to, they're trying to talk him into, his advisors trying to talk him into going to get his PhD in agronomy.
And Grace's last name as a married woman is Stark, S-T-A-R-K.
That is correct.
And before Dave has to get away real quick, what are the names of his children?
Of what?
Faith and Dave's children's names are what?
Or Faith, or
We got Katie.
Katie. Katie, Christian, and Allison.
There you go.
And then Katie, Christian, and Allison?
Yes.
All right.
Katie is the oldest, Christian is the next, and Allison is the youngest.
And they're all away from home?
Christian is in Texas, and Katie and Allison are in Holland, Grand Rapids, Michigan area.
Well, look, David has to get going, and we've just about exhausted our interview. I want to thank you for doing this interview, and thank you for your service very much, very, very much.
As I've been told, as I tell people, it was my privilege.
David, did you have anything to ask him?
I don't.
Okay.
When people, you done that, they just ask me that it stop me and thank me, and that just I had a hard time for how to answer them, and I finally just said it was my privilege.
Good, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.